I just graduated Novi High School this past year, and I'll be going to the University of Michigan, um, like next week, to probably study computer science and maybe also add like a dual major for some sort of engineering. But so enough with that. Let's go ahead and get to iOS. And so basically just a quick introduction to iOS app development. So ever since the App Store was released, iOS app development has pretty quickly become one of the most dominant fields of computer science. It's a pretty big industry now. And so at the sort of beginning of that release, Objective-C was the main language that you used to create iOS and Mac apps. And it worked pretty well, but it sometimes is a little bit difficult and a little bit cumbersome. So in 2014, Apple released a new programming language that they created themselves. And it's designed to make the development a lot easier and more elegant. And so that language is Swift. And so Swift is Apple's new programming language. And I mean, I guess it's not so new anymore, but it's easy to learn, pretty easy to learn. And it's now used pretty ubiquitously to develop apps for basically every operating system that Apple creates and markets. And so we're going to be using Swift 5 and Xcode to do what we do today. So you are going to need a Mac for that. And you're going to need to have Xcode downloaded, but it's pretty simple to download. You can just download it off of the Mac App Store, and you can follow along while it's downloading. So as a language, Swift is kind of like JavaScript in terms of its syntax and the way it looks, but it's pretty heavily object-oriented. So you're gonna kind of see that when we actually work with it. And so what we can do is we can well, first, what we can do is before we go ahead and create an app, let's go ahead and create an Xcode playground. And so what that'll allow us to do is just explore Swift as a language on its own before we get into creating the app that we'll be creating today. So what I'm going to do is I have Xcode open over here. And so the way you sort of create what's called a playground is there's a button right here that says get started with the playground. So you can just click that and popped up over here. So it brings up this window right over here. And it tells you to choose a template for your playground. We're going to choose iOS and we're going to make it blank because we're just going to be sort of briefly going over some of these features. And now we're going to click next. And just let's go ahead and save it somewhere. I'm gonna call it like just call it something, doesn't really matter, and we can go ahead and create it. And so now we have our playground created. So what this is it's just a simple environment for us to write some Swift code and then get an output. So it'll you can create sort of console applications, things that'll just print things to the screen, and you can sort of control which lines of code you're running and stuff like that. So you can see that if we just run the code that we have over here, it takes a second to initialize everything. But on this right side, it immediately sort of says hello playground. And so let's go ahead and just break down what this code is doing. First of all, we import UIKit. And so that's just, it actually isn't relevant for what we're gonna be doing here, but UIKit is the framework that you build all of your graphical user interfaces on for your apps. So we will be talking about it later, but not right now. And over here, we create a variable. And the way you create a variable in Swift is by using this var keyword. And you create the variable with a certain name. And over here, we're calling it str for string. And we assign it with this equal sign, and we assign it to hello playground. And we keep since it's a string, which is just words, we keep it in quotes. And we just write what we want to be in that string, right? And so this is just giving you a live view of your variables. But what we can actually do is if we actually want to print it to the console, we can use the print method, and we can say print, and then in parentheses, we can pass what we want to print. We can print that string. And you can see in the console right over here, we've printed hello playground. And so I'm going to go a little bit fast just to go over some of the basic language features, but this is something that you can review on your own as well. But just some of the quick features that we're going to be using later. The way you create a variable of a certain type is you use a colon. So what we can do is we can say a var, and we can call it x, maybe it's a number. We're going to write a colon over here, and we're going to say it's an integer. And we can either set that equal to something or we don't have to, but we're just going to set it equal to to 10. And then we can just go ahead and print out the value of x as well, right? So you can see now we print out hello playground in 10. And you can sort of, if you wanted to print out another string, if we change the string to like, let's say, change it from hello playground to number of apples. And let's go ahead and just change this x, the variable x name to like apples. And we can print out apples instead. If we wanted to print out number of apples with like the number of like with that variable, the way you're traditionally supposed to do that is you print. And so you can say you would have this string and you want to add a plus sign and you can say string and you can convert that apples into a string, right? So we convert the apples into a string so that it can be added with another string. And we can print that and we can run that. Yep, and so now, sorry, you click this run button down here and you'll see that number of apples is 10. And sorry, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to just interrupt me. If I'm going too fast or you don't understand something, that's totally fine. So moving on to some control flow, if we wanted to check if the number of apples is above a certain amount, we would use what we call an if statement. So what we can say is we can say if, and we can take if apples is greater than, let's say 5, then what we can do is we can have an opening curly bracket and it automatically creates that closing curly bracket. And we can go ahead and print, we have more than 5 apples. And so actually you have to use double quotes for these strings. So it's similar to Java in that sense. So you can see it's kind of like a cross of a whole bunch of other languages in terms of syntax. And so if I run it, you can see that we have more than 5 apples. So that's kind of the very basics. If you can get a little bit more complicated by using for loops, right? So let's say we wanted to iterate like 10 times. We can say for, and we can say for x in, and so that in keyword is going to be in a certain range. And the way we define like a range is we'll say 1 ... 10. So this is kind of different from most programming languages, but that ... is just signifying 1 to 10 inclusive. And if we don't want to include the 10 at the end, we can delete this last dot and make that a less than sign. And then we can open this curly bracket and we can print, we can just go ahead and print out x here. And if I run this, you can see it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And so I know that was a little bit fast, but I kind of just wanted to go over the basic language features that we'll be using in our app. Of course, there's a lot more you can do with Swift. There's classes and stuff like that, and we'll briefly discuss those things. But and if you have any questions, just feel free to ask. So now we're going to go ahead, move away from the playground, and we'll talk about the actual app that we're going to create. So first of all, let's go ahead and just see what like our end goal is. So as you can see, Xcode comes with an iOS simulator. You guys won't have this yet because haven't created the app yet, but we can go ahead and, oh, sorry about that. We can go ahead and open the app that we've created. And so it's a hit the target game. If you guys are there for the Java lecture, it's kind of very similar to that, but it's using these user interface elements and in an attempt to look nice, right? So we're saying the target is 64. So we have this slider that we can move around. And the goal is kind of for the user to guess, okay, where is 64 from 0 to 100? And then we press the shoot button and it says, I guess too low and I guess 60. So let's edge it up a bit. Maybe we overshoot. Now it says too high, we guessed 84. Come back, too high, 68. And I got it, right? So, and then we'll have this button change to a play again button so we can keep playing to our heart's content. So that's the first app we're going to develop. It's very simple, but at the same time, it mixes a lot of different elements and it can be a little bit difficult to keep track of everything because there's just so many things happening at once. So I'll try to go as slow as I can, but again, if you guys have any questions, just interrupt me. So, oh, whoops. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up So let me go ahead and close my playground. And I can go to the top of Xcode over here, and I can say File, New, Project. So I can create a new project. Awesome. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create what's called a single view application. And so even though our project is kind of like a game, we're not going to click this game because that's more of like a physics-based game and stuff like that. We're just going to use a single view application. So we're going to click next. And then you see these sort of options.
Okay, you want to check the chat real quick?
Yeah, my bad. I may have lost the chat. Hold on, let me stop sharing. Okay. So what do you guys mean that your Xcode is different? What is it saying?
If one of you want to unmute yourself real quick just to speak.
Yeah, just maybe sort of describe what you're seeing.
When I open a project, after that it goes to choose options for your new product, and it says some product name and asks for an organization identifier. It's a bit different than what I can see from yours.
Is it not? Yeah, so I think that's what I had. You just might have been one step ahead of me. Is this what you're seeing?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
okay.
I can't see the playground thing. How do you get the playground?
Well, so what I did, you can just go to File, New, and you should see Playground in that option, in those options. Do you see that?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I got it.
So I mean, if you guys missed the playground part, it's not terribly important that we do that. So we can just follow along with the project. That was just sort of very basics of Swift. And I saw somebody had asked a question about like Swift console app. Maybe console app wasn't the best description. It's just a way to play with Swift and understand how the language works. So okay. I think I'm going to move on. So we have this sort of these options over here. And I don't know why I can't see the chat when I'm not sharing, but please interrupt me if you guys have any questions. So just unmute yourselves and interrupt. It's okay. So we have product name over here. And so we're just going to go ahead and come up with a name for our application. So we're going to call this Hit the Target app. So basically, because we're just trying to hit the target. The team you can leave as none. Organization name, maybe just your name. An organization identifier can also just be anything sort of random. It doesn't really matter what those three things are, because we're not like, they matter if you're going to publish them to the App Store. But since this is just sort of like a practice app that we're doing, it's not that important. Language, make sure that's Swift instead of Objective-C. User interface will be selected as Swift UI, but go ahead and change that to storyboard. It's just a little bit easier to get started with the storyboard sort of interfacing for your user interface. So just go ahead and change that to storyboard. And you should see these you can just leave as they are. So that's what we're going to do for our project. And now we can click next. And then it'll sort of just ask you to save it somewhere, and go ahead and save it wherever you want. And now you should see a screen like this. So I'll wait a few seconds, but yeah, so we should all be at a screen like this. If you don't get a screen like this or you get some sort of error, just interrupt me and say something. Okay, so what we have here is, this is our Xcode environment. And so just a quick introduction, we have sort of many different panes to this, so it can be a little bit confusing. But over here on the left side, you have your sort of file explorer that's showing you all of these files. In the center, that's the actual file itself that you're viewing. And on the right, you have this sort of information pane that will give you information when it's relevant, right? And so we'll get to when it's relevant later. But over here, we right now are selected on this app file itself. And so this gives us some metadata about the application. And so you can see we have this display name, the bundle identifier, version, build. Version and build are just like the version that of the application. Bundle identifier, don't worry about that. That's kind of meant for, again, for the App Store. The display name is just what the app's name is. And over here, you also have this thing called target. And so this is sort of describing who you're making this app for. So we're gonna target iOS 13. And we're gonna build this application just for iPhone. So go ahead and click out of iPad. And you can see that this main interface is just sort of, that we'll get to that in a second, but it's called a main. And we have a few other options over here for device orientation. We're gonna unclick landscape left and landscape right. We're only gonna allow the user to use this in portrait mode. And we can leave kind of all of the rest of them the default. So those are just kind of app settings. And so now over here on this left side, we can see the actual files of the app itself. And so if you go over here to appdelegate.swift and scenedelegate.swift, those are kind of the Swift files that'll run in the back end, and they're back end of your app, and they're kind of responsible for serving up your view and making sure everything's running properly in the background. We don't need to edit those or worry about them for this lecture, and you can do a lot of things without ever touching these. So now the next thing that we need to look at is viewcontroller.swift. Viewcontroller.swift is the main Swift file that we'll be editing. It is the, it goes ahead and actually controls the view that you're looking at. And so kind of like what iOS calls views are what we would think of as like pages for our apps. So like the main view, the main page that we're looking at is going to be controlled by this view controller. And you can see that it imports UIKit because it needs to interact with those UI elements. And we create a class called a view controller, and we use that colon to signify that it's of type UI view controller. So basically this is a user interface view controller, so it's controlling that view, right? And so if you're familiar with override functions from Java, this override func is similar to that, but all we really need to know about it is that everything after this super.viewDidLoad line is the code that we'll write for our setup code. That's code that'll just run as soon as the screen is loaded. Okay, so now we can move on to the next file. We'll see main.storyboard. And so if you don't see main.storyboard, say something, but over here is main.storyboard, and main.storyboard is basically the sort of interface that we're gonna be using to build our user interface for our application. And so that is the storyboard, and we're gonna go into much more detail. Sorry?
I can't see the main.storyboard part.
Okay, so what you might have done is when you created a new project, did you select the UI part of it as being Swift UI, or did you select it as being like as being storyboards? Do you remember?
I think it was Swift UI.
Yeah, so that's going to be the problem. So you can go ahead and I don't know of a way to switch it in the project. There probably is, but I just don't know. It would be easier if you just created a new project, and when you have that option for either Swift UI or storyboards, go ahead and click storyboard.
Okay, sure, I'll do that. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just gonna move on. We haven't really got into anything where we have to do anything yet, just sort of exploring the interface. Now we see assets.xc assets, and that's kind of where you're gonna put your app icons. If you wanna store images and stuff like that, you would do it here. We're not gonna touch it today, and it gets a little bit complicated, but that's kind of where you would look to do those sorts of things. And the next thing is the launch screen.storyboard. So a lot of apps, basically every app has what's called a launch screen. And that's kind of the screen that you see while the app is loading. So if you were to open up Facebook, you'll see like the Facebook launch screen has the Facebook logo in the center, or a game usually has a game company logo in the center. So you can design your launch screen here. We're not going to touch it. It's relatively self-explanatory to be able to do that. Then the next file you have is info.plist. And over here is just sort of all of these permissions. So when your app asks you if it can use your location, if your app asks you if it can access your photos, you have to configure all of that over here in order to be able to access your location and your photos. Apple is pretty like strict about security and stuff like that. So that's kind of the point of this file. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is, and then the rest is sort of app tests and UI tests. Again, we're not gonna worry about that. If you're gonna build an app for production, it's highly recommended that you build tests for the app. But again, this is a hackathon, and this is sort of just like the first start for an app, so we're not gonna worry about that. Okay, anyway, so let's go back to main.storyboard. And over here, we're gonna see our storyboard, right? And so over here is our view, and we can see kind of the iPhone that we're gonna build our app for. And so at the top right corner, you should see a plus button, and that's for the library. And I'm just gonna drag my library in here. And so over here, we can see all of these sort of UI elements that we can import, that we can put on to our screen. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna drag a label. Whoops. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna drag a label onto the screen. And you can see that it's almost like a PowerPoint, like it automatically centers things for you. And so we're just gonna keep it centered right over here. We're gonna expand it a bit. Again, this is pretty easy, right? Just like it sort of nicely goes exactly where you want it to go. And over here, so on this right side, that's kind of our inspection panel, but we're gonna go ahead, change the text by double clicking on it, and we're gonna change it to hit the target. Awesome. And so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go over to this right side pane, and you should be on like this this triangle, this attributes inspector. My mouse is over it right now, so that should be sort of the tab you're on. And you can change things like the font, so we can bump up the font. We can also align it so that it's in the center. It's almost like Microsoft Word or Google Docs. You can do all sorts of formatting with it. We're gonna leave it like this. If you wanna mess with it some more, you can. And you can also change the position as you like. And we're gonna get to some problems with this in a second, but we're just gonna go ahead and build our user interface first. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna press plus again, and we're gonna go ahead and add a slider. So this slider is going to be the actual sort of interface that the user uses to interact with the game. So we're going to pull the slider. We're just going to pull it all the way to the margins. If you have any problems, just interrupt me. And I'm just going to move the label down a bit. We also probably want another label to tell the user what the target is. So we're going to drag another label onto the screen, and this time we're going to align it onto the right. And actually just make sure you expand it a little bit and increase the height. Now what we can do is we can change this to target, and we'll leave a colon and just leave that space empty, just like that. And the last thing we need, well, actually we need two more things. We need another label. And so this label is kind of going to be like our status label. It's going to be like, are you too low? Are you too high? Did you win? Things like that. So we're going to center that, increase the width a bit, expand it, just to like a sort of random point. So it's centered. I'm going to center the text over here, and I can double click on that text and change it to, we're actually gonna just, we're gonna leave it as label because we're gonna be programmatically adjusting this in our game logic. So just leave it as label. And the final UI element is a button. So we need to drag a button over here. And we're going to expand it out just a little bit so that the user has like more space to press the button. And we're gonna call it shoot for shoot, right? So this is kind of our entire user interface. There is one problem though. As we all know, Apple releases many different types of phones. They have phones as small as like the iPhone SE. They have phones as large as the iPhone 11 Pro Max or whatever it was called. So if you just sort of drag everything onto the screen and just throw it on there, it looks good here, but we have no idea how this is going to look on any sort of different screen size. So the way you sort of address that problem is through what's called constraints. And so we're going to see down here where my mouse is on the bottom right side, just to the left of that right-hand tab, we see all of these sort of elements, and this is for constraining those elements. So what we can do is we can click on this element, and we can click on the one with the square. And what we can do is we can add a constraint to sort of constrain it at the top, the left, and the right-hand side with a certain number of pixels. So for me, it's 263, 20, 20. It doesn't really matter what it is. And so I'm just going to do those three constraints on all of them. And I'm going to go through it a little bit quickly. Like, to be completely honest, this probably isn't the best way of constraining elements. It's just the sort of quick and dirtiest way. But there's a lot of cool things you can do with this to make sure that it's truly extensible. You can make it like auto rotate and stuff like that with auto constraining and things. But we're just going to do very simple top, left, and right hand side. And so that our primitive way might actually make this not work on every screen size. And we're just going to go ahead and test that in 1 second. So top, left, and right. And so up until now, has anybody had any problems with this? Or is everybody following along? Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go ahead and actually build our app. And so we can actually go ahead and look at it. At the top left, for some reason, my default is an iPhone SE. That might not be for yours, but I'm just gonna go ahead and change mine to the iPhone 11 Pro Max, just the biggest screen because it's a bigger screen for my computer. And so you can change that on the top left corner where you see this play sign. Just to the left of it, you see what device you're going to build it to. And so you can press this play button to actually build your application. And it will, and you should see that the build succeeded and the app should be loading. Looks like I have a slight problem. Oh, my bad. So mine was hit the target app, and you can see that that loads just fine. Sorry. So it was just taking a little bit longer to load, and I got impatient. So you can see that we can actually already move around this slider. There's no code that we have to add. We can already press this button. And so with 0 lines of code, we were able to sort of build our entire user interface. But obviously, we're not going to just not write code, right? We need to be able to build the logic that's going to sort of run our whole application. And so the way you do that is we're going to work in viewController.swift. But we can actually do this in an almost visual way. So we have our main.storyboard over here. And you can see on the right side, what I'm going to do is on this top right corner, there's this button that's like bluish. So we can press that to sort of hide the right side inspector. And you'll see another button right here, right under that, that says Add Editor on right. We're going to click that. And you'll see that we automatically sort of enter the split view. It is a little bit weird because it puts this view on the right side. What we're going to do for that is we're going to go to this folder over here, hit the target app, and we're going to navigate to viewController.swift. So make sure you're on viewController.swift. And back over here on the left side, we're going to come over on this left side and just click on view. So that was kind of a lot and a little bit fast. So if you missed that, just let me know and I'll go over it again. Please unmute yourself if you have any questions. So now we have our viewController.swift and it's side by side with our actual application. And so what we can do from here is we can actually sort of drag these components onto our code to auto-generate some code so that we can later interact with these elements. And so this is how we're going to do that. So we're going to start with a target label. You can either hold Control or right-click and drag, but I like to hold the Control key. Then we click and drag this label into our code. And so it creates this sort of connection pop-up. And we can see that we can change this connection and it's of type outlet. So that's going to be, we're just going to leave it as an outlet. And we're going to call it in this name section, a target label. And we're going to leave it all, the rest of it, all the defaults. And we're going to press connect. And you can see over here, it says at IB outlet weak var target label : UI label. And all you really need to know is that we've created a variable called target label that's of type UI label. So it's a label object, and it's an outlet. So like an outlet connection to this UI element. And if we hover over it, you can see that it highlights that UI element on our screen. And so we're going to do this for everything. So except the labels that don't matter. We're going to go ahead and control drag from our slider onto the next line, and we're going to call this our slider, and we're going to press connect. And now we're going to create a new line. We're going to control drag our button onto line 15, and we're going to call it button, and we're going to press connect. And finally, we're going to control drag this label over here, and we're going to call it status label, and we're going to press connect. Sweet. So now we have all of our sort of objects, and we can work with those. However, a button is a little bit more complicated, right? So we have this object, and we're going to be using it later. But the button is, you can think of it more like an actor, right? Like when you press the button, it has to do some sort of action, right? So what we can do is we can control drag the button again. So we're going to control drag this button, and we're going to change the connection type from an outlet to an action. And so remember, you have to change it from an outlet to an action. And we're going to call the name button pressed. And so what this is going to do, and you can leave the rest defaults and press connect. And so it creates an IB action called button pressed. And so that's a function. And we're going to write code in that function. And the code that goes in this function executes as soon as we press this button. So we're going to test that by writing print, and we're going to say button pressed right over here. We can go ahead and save that file, press run. And you can see that this simulator pops up. We'll press the shoot button, and we go over here, and you see that in our console that's now just popped up, we have this button press message. So now this is cool. We can use this to be able to actually decide whether we've won or lost the game, right? So now what we want to do is we want to create a few more variables that will actually sort of run the logic of our game. So we're going to create a new line right here on line, my line 18. I'm going to create a variable, and I'm going to call it the target number. And so this variable is representing the target number for the user to sort of aim at. And the way you generate a random number is you use this integer class that Swift has, and you say int.random, and you would say in, and so you do in colon, and you want to provide it a range. And so the reason I did the for loop earlier is so that we could go over that range sort of concept. And so we're just going to say it's going to be any number from 1 to 100, and we're going to say 2 dots and a less than sign over here. So we don't want it to be exactly 100. So that's the syntax for generating a random number, and now we have a random number. So now a few other things we want to do is we want to get rid of this status label, because when you first start playing the game, you don't want there to be any sort of status. You don't want that thing to just say label, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to change our status label, and we're going to get that object, and we're going to say dot text, and we're going to set that equal to an empty string. And the other thing we need to do is we need to change our target label, and we need to change target label, and we need to say dot text, and we want to set that equal to, and we're going to set it equal to target colon. And so the way you concatenate integers with strings is you can use this backward slash and then parentheses. And so then anything in the parentheses is like a variable. And so we're going to put our variable as a target number. And so that's something that we didn't go over in the playground, but that's how you would put a string, an integer inside of a string. And so now we have this target label set, and that's kind of it, right? For when we want to get it to set up. So now let's go ahead and run our application, and let's see if it generates a random number, right? So let's run it, and you can see our target is 68. So it's a random number in between 0 and 100. And so now what's left is we need to be able to actually determine if we've hit our target. It is a little bit, our user interface is a little bit confusing in that we don't have any bounds on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to main.storyboard, which is just on my left side. I'm going to click this plus button on the top right again. And actually, I need to change this. Sorry, let's go ahead and click on this explicitly. So go ahead and click on the view. And so click on your view explicitly so that it brings up these objects, because this plus button is kind of like a smart thing that detects what you're trying to do. So make sure that it knows that you want to change the user interface. Let's go ahead and add a label to our screen. We're going to add it right here. We're going to change the text of that label to 0. And then what we can do is we can select that label, Command C, Command V, we can paste it. And then we can move it all the way to the right side on the margin and change the text to 100. I guess we need to move it back now. Sweet. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to constrain these. So we're going to click the label, then we're going to click this constraint option, and we're going to add the top, left, and right constraints. Then we're going to click the other label, click the square constraints button, top, left, and right. Again, if you have any questions, please unmute yourself and ask them. So now what we're going to do is, so now we have our user interface set up. I just forgot about those 2 labels. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want, when this button is pressed, we want to detect the position of the slider, and we want to determine, is the position of the slider equal to our number? So we're first of all just going to go ahead and print out the position of our slider to get an idea of what these values are like. So we're going to print slider.value will get us the value of that slider. And now we're going to go ahead and pause our app and run it again. And now we have our app. Our target is 98. So we can just like drag it close. We shoot, nothing happens. But you'll notice we have a problem. When we print out our value, it actually seems to be scaled from 0 to 1, right? So we could do some math on the slider value and adjust the scale to be 0 to 100. But we can actually make this a lot easier for ourselves. We can take our slider and we can set the minimum and maximum value. So in the viewDidLoad function, we're going to say slider.minimum value is equal to 0. And we're going to say slider.maximum value is equal to 100. The 0 isn't technically needed. It's just to be a little bit extra explicit about what we're doing. All right, so now that's going to set our minimum and maximum of 0 to 100. We still have a problem of it being decimals. So we are going to need to convert it to an integer. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another variable. We're going to call it, so we're going to say var, and we're going to call it user guess. And we're going to set that equal to the int, and we're going to say int, and then in parentheses, we're going to say slider.value. And so this will convert the value in the slider from a decimal to an integer. And I apologize, I'm kind of going quickly over these programming concepts because the sort of focus is how you would apply them to Xcode. But if you do have any questions, I can explain them in greater detail if you just ask. Okay, so now we have this user guess. Let's go ahead and compare it to our target number. So what we want to say is if the user guess is equal to our target number. And so the way you say is something equal to it is you use equals equals. So that's a testing for equality. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. And we're going to say, okay, if the user guess is equal to our target number, we're going to say, let's go ahead and change our status label dot text. And we're going to set it equal to you win. Right? It's because the user won. But in the case where it's not equal but is less than, so we're going to say else if the user guess is less than the target number. So if our guess is less than our target number, we're going to say our status label dot text is equal to too low. And we're actually going to give the user a hint and say what they guessed. We're going to say you guessed. And we're going to have a colon, and then remember our backward slash, parentheses, parentheses, and then inside of those parentheses, we're going to type user guess. And finally, in the last case, else, and if it's not equal to, it's not less than, it must be greater than, then what we can say is we can take our status label dot text and set it equal to too high, you guessed, and we're going to have a backward slash, parentheses, parentheses, and we're going to put in user guess. Okay, so you'll notice that we're getting a warning. We're getting a warning right now. It says variable user guess was never mutated. Consider changing to let constant. So this is something we haven't gone over before, but in Swift, there's two different types of ways you can declare a variable. You can either use this var keyword or you can use the let keyword. The let indicates that this variable is a constant and that it won't change. And so every time we run this function, we're creating a variable called user guess, and that guess isn't going to change inside of this function, right? So that's why we use this let variable, this let sort of identifier, so that our compiler and we know that it can't change. It makes it, I think it makes it slightly faster, but it's more for programmer readability, so that we know that this user guess isn't going to magically change in the function. And actually, if we try to change it, it'll throw an error. So it's a safety thing as well. So now what we're going to do is, this is kind of the entire game logic of our application. We're going to go ahead and pause the running, and we're going to run it again. And we can see hit the target. Our target is 85. Let's go. Let's just overshoot. You're going to see too high. Looks like I messed up my capitalization, but it says I guess 96. Let's go a little bit down. Oh, sorry. The target was 85. Okay, so too low, I guess 82. I win, right? Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's fix my capitalization mistake. All right, so now let's go ahead and make this sort of display a little bit more responsive to our inputs. And so we're gonna go ahead and change the background color when you miss versus when you get it in. So the way we change the background color is we have to remember that the view controller is an object of UI view controller. And if you're familiar with Java, you know that the way you access yourself inside of your class is by using the self keyword. Actually, no, sorry, that's this. But in Java, it's this. In Swift, we use self. So we're gonna say self dot, and we're gonna say self dot view, and that's gonna get the current view. And we're gonna get the view, and we're gonna get the background color. And so this is, I have it in the else if the user guess is less than the target number. We're gonna set it equal to, and we're gonna set it equal to UI color, which is the color library. And we're gonna set it equal to UI color dot red. And we're gonna do the same line of code in the other else, self.view.background color equals UI color green. You're gonna notice that, sorry, red. And we can now, if we win, we can say self.view.background color equals UI color green. You're gonna notice that these colors are kind of ugly. We're gonna leave it like this. I'll leave it as an exercise to you guys to change the colors to be more visually appealing. They're just a little bit harsh. We're gonna try it again. The target is 18. Let's go a little bit too low. You can see that it's very red to indicate that we guessed too low. Now we guess 12, too low again. We guess 16. Let's guess too high to test that. We guess 42. 15. And we win, and it goes to green. Awesome. So our app is now a little bit is kind of responsive, and we can win the game. We are missing the key sort of element that every game needs to have, and that's the ability to play again, right? And so what we want to do is we want to create some sort of variable that represents the game state that we're in, whether we can play again or whether we can't play again. So we're going to create a var, and we're going to call it can play again, and it's going to be a Boolean. And so if you guys remember, Booleans are true or false. So we're going to set it equal to false to start with. And what we're going to say is in this IB action function, at the very sort of top of our function, we're going to say if we can play again. So if the user has already won the game and we can play again, then we're going to write some code to account for that. But let's go ahead and actually make it so that the user can play again. If the user guess is equal to the target number, we're going to set this can play again variable equal to true. And so just as a brief explanation, we're going to make our shoot button transform itself into a play again button. So that's why we're putting this all in the same button press function. So remember, in this if user guess is equal to target number, we want can play again is equal to true. And so once we can play again and we press the button to play again, we want to reset that variable to be false so that the user has to play the game through again before he can play again. And now what we want to do is we want to kind of just reset all of our variables. We want to reset our target number and we're going to set it equal to int.random. I'm going to go a little bit quicker through these ones because it's the same code. So we're going to set our random number again. We're also going to change the target label dot text. We're going to change that text to target colon backward slash parenthesis, and then target number. And we're also going to change the status label dot text. We're going to set that equal to an empty string. And the other thing that we need to change is the self dot view dot background color, and we're going to set that equal to a UI color dot white. We're going to set it back to white, and we're going to change this. I just forgot to add a T there to my target number, so that works fine. Okay, so but now we also want to change this button text from shoot to play again once we win. So the way we do that is a little bit complicated. There isn't a button.text, but what we're going to do is under the status label.text equals you win, we're going to say button.set title. And over here, we have two different arguments. And so the first argument is going to be the title of the button. And we're going to set that to play again. And then it has this for, and it's basically asking you for what's called a UI control.state. All we need to know right now is we're just going to say for.normal. And that just means in every state of the button, we want it to say play again. Because sometimes you can configure these buttons to sort of change their title once they're clicked, like back and forth. But that's not exactly what we want here. We just want to set the title for good. And in this if can, yeah, sorry.
Wrap up in about 5 minutes because our web development workshop will start.
Right, yep, almost done. And so this is the last line of code that we need to write. We're gonna set under this UI color.white, we're gonna set this button.set title again, and we're gonna set it to shoot, and we're gonna change it for .normal, just like we did for the other one. So kind of a lot of code. I'm gonna wait a second and we can stop and we can run it again, and we should have a finished product. So can run this. Now we have this hit the target. Our target is 63. Let's go ahead, move that slider. You can see we guessed too high at 65. Let's edge it down just a little bit. We guessed too low at 62. Oh, too high 64. And I win, right? And so now you can see that this button sort of fluidly transitions to play again. You can click the button again. We did miss one part. It shoots again, but we can play again. Real quick, we forgot a line of code. Under this, in the last line in this if, we want to return, so we don't run any more of that function. And so we're going to press stop. Going to run it again. Hit the target's 41. We're going to shoot. We guess 37. Let's go up a bit. 42, down. You win, right? So now we can play again. It resets the game, and we can keep playing forever. And that's kind of the whole app. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask. I know it was a lot and it was kind of fast, but that's sort of like a quick and simple app that we can develop. So just a quick recap, we've gone over Swift development, introduced Xcode, we used storyboards to build our user interface and wrote logic around these UI elements in order to control our game. So there's a lot of different places you can go from here. Basically every single one of your favorite iOS apps was written sort of in this method. So there's a lot of really complicated stuff you can do. So you can research different ways of building